Good morning, everyone online as well. I see Professor Chikoma, Isoba, Comfort, and Professor Sarasali. We hope you're hearing us.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. My name is Dr. Richard Asaba. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Gender Studies, formerly the School of Women and Gender Studies, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are here for a dissemination meeting for a project that was implemented in northern Uganda by our staff, one of our staff, or two of our staff, together with other partners. That is Stepping Stones. And I would like to go through how we are going to proceed. But first, allow me to recognize the presence of the director, the deputy director, DRGT, Professor Julius Chikoma, who is online. Professor, you're very welcome. I would also like to recognize the presence of Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Professor Sarasali, our director for the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. Professor Ruth Nsibirano is also here, the head of department. And of course, our presenter, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo. And our students, I see a number of our students here, postgraduate students, mainly. The media, Dr. Jamba, yes. You're welcome. I think we shall interact more as we go on. So now, my task today is simple. As I've said, I'm going to be your moderator, and allow me to go through quickly our program, how we are going to proceed. So we are going to have opening remarks from our head of department, Professor Ruth Nsibirano. We shall also have opening remarks from Professor Sarasali, if she's not busy, that side. And then we shall also have opening remarks from Professor Julius Chikoma, the Director, Administration and Graduate Training at DRGT. And then after that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a tea break. And after the tea break, we are going to have the presentation. We had planned to have two presentations, but one of the presenters is unwell. That is Baron Oron from Stepping Stones. So we are going to have a presentation from Dr. Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo, who is the co-principal investigator on this project. And then after that, we are going to have reactions from you, the physical audience, and the people online, and questions and etc. And then we hope to have closing remarks from our deputy principal of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, that is Professor Erica Wich, who will be joining us later. Okay, so I think with that, I don't want to waste a lot of time. We've already lost time. But why are we here, ladies and gentlemen? The project was implemented, titled From Violence and Victims to Voices and Visions, exploring the power of mindfulness to effect lasting change in post-conflict settings in northern Uganda. As I said earlier, it was implemented by Professor Sarasali, who was the principal investigator, and Dr. Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo, the co-principal investigator. But they were partners. They partnered with the Salamander Trust and Stepping Stones. The lead person from Salamander Trust was Dr. Alice Wellborn. We thought she would join us online. We don't know. The lead trainer was Mr. Baron Oron from Stepping Stones. This project was funded by the Mind and Life Institute, USA, And its aim was to explore if post-war populations, and males in particular, could develop pro-social and compassionate, positive gender identity through using the stepping stones methodology for peace and prosperity. Later on, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama will take us through this project, the background, the objectives, and the key findings, and etc. So, Professor Ruth Nsibirano, are you ready for the opening remarks?
Thank you, moderator, Dr. Richard Asaba. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Our online audience, Professor Chikoma, Director Diarajiti, Director Sarah Sali, Comfort, Leo, all of you online, you are welcome. Thanks for joining us and for sparing your precious time this morning to be with us. I also extend my gratitude to the project implementing team led by Director Sarah Sali and also supported by Dr. Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to be here this morning to talk about issues of violence and issues of pulling out of violence. As scholars in Makerere University, this is a very welcome move for us to contribute to the body of knowledge. Time is long since here for the South to contribute to knowledge generation and also change the narrative where the South is always the consumer of knowledge. It is my single honor to say that the team has done us well to take us to an area where little is known from the South, and that is the area of violence and in the situations of conflict. You very well agree with me that the northern part of the country has been under conflict for a very extended period of time. And therefore, this unwelcome violence and conflict situation has left a number of victims, people that have suffered through the extended period, first the LRA, and then the resultant poverty and reduced productivity in the area that has traumatized the people in the north and also extended effects on the rest of the country. Because they are our brothers and sisters, we are not happy that they are not comfortable. So the research team has done as well by bringing us together, and we are looking forward to seeing what positive changes are possibly available. And I'm also excited for the fact that we are partnering with the North, not only as consumers, but equal players on the arena of generating knowledge and also participating in research that generates evidence for us then to implement positive changes, to influence our policies, to influence our practices. In addition to that, it is also interesting to know that we are also looking at men specifically to see how they are contributing through a changed mindset. We want to see how minds, how our psychological wellness, well-being, and I'm happy that Professor Chikoma will be joining us because he's a guru in the area of psychology. How our minds, if we change our minds, if we work on affecting and also influencing the mind, this could be a recipe for sustainability, for change, for recovery, and for healing. I also am excited that the research team has given the opportunity to the Department of Women and Gender Studies to be able to contribute to the generation of knowledge and experiences with evidence from the South. I do not have much to share with you this morning, but I welcome you to what is promising to be a very rich and extended conversation. Professor Chikoma, the Director Graduate Training, is online. Professor, you are welcome to give your opening remarks to the audience that is eagerly waiting to hear from you. Over to you, Professor Chikoma.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saba. And before you, I also thank you, Professor Ruth, the head of department, and generally everyone. I bring you greetings from the Directorate of Graduate Training, as well as generally from the management of Makerere University as a whole. And I welcome all the participants to this, this dissemination workshop, which I am sure, as my colleague has already mentioned, should be a very engaging and very fruitful conversation. For us here at the Directorate of Graduate Training, we pride ourselves as being the heartbeat of graduate research training, and also the coordination of activities of researchers and graduate students. So it gives me pleasure to be part of this conversation that is as a result of very important research that has been carried out by the team from the School of now the Institute of Women and Gender Studies. So as a directorate, activities like this are what actually gives Makerere the visibility that it needs, especially in terms of our researchers going out there and interfacing with communities on key issues that are very important to the society. So in that respect, I would like to thank the researchers, of course, led by the PI, Professor Sarah Sally, and the co-PI, Dr. Evelyn Rukundo, Lutwama, and of course, the rest of the research team that you are working with, as well as the project partners that I've had being mentioned. We thank you for the hard work you have put in carrying out the project, the writing out of the findings from the research project, and I also very much I'm impressed and I'm also intrigued by the way from those research findings you are using them to reframe the narrative. The narrative of saying that let's move away from violence and victims, or the view of seeing ourselves as always violent, as always victims, but looking for ways that we can pick positive lessons from all these experiences. So I like very much the theme discussion of from violence and victims to voices and visions. It is indeed that we need today. We need more voices, as I heard Ruth mention. We need, and society needs to hear more voices from originally, communities that were seen mainly as victims. We need more voices, and we need to engage in conversations with those voices so that we can now have new visions of the future. So I'm hoping that the conversation this morning will give us and will inspire us in new ways of looking at some of these concerns and some of these problems that befall our society. The question of violence, and especially gender-based violence, is a very, very important issue, and it's a very important conversation to discuss and look for ways of how do we look for ways of how all of us get involved. And I'm very happy to hear that the focus was predominantly in finding ways that men can be seen as part of the solution and not always being seen as, the cause and the sources of violence, especially the gender-based forms of violence. So I believe that this conversation, in this dissemination workshop, and the discussions that will go on today will be both engaging and insightful, especially about how we can all play a role in positive change. In psychology, we now have predominantly a movement towards positive psychology, where we look for strengths in all of us. We look for strength, even victims, the number of strengths they have, if they are able to be supported to look for strengths within themselves so that they can look at how they can get out of their situation. So I like very much the direction of the theme, where we are all being called upon to play a role in positive change. I believe that through such themes, we will have participants broaden the parameters of debate on this key issue, and which has become also a very critical concern in society today. In this way, we hope our students will be inspired to become researchers that are contextually grounded, but also socially relevant. And we believe as well at this, as Makerere University, we believe that the humanities especially and the social sciences are very important in these kind of conversations, not least because of their ability to understand the human condition. And we know that humanities help foster social justice and equality, and they reveal how people have tried to make a moral, spiritual, and intellectual sense of the world. So as I come to a conclusion, I call upon your active participation in these discussions, as well as networking. And I'm particularly looking forward to hearing from the excellent speakers or the speakers that will be sharing their insights on this occasion. And I urge us, all of us who are attending this workshop, to make this a very productive and collaborative conversation. As we build for the future, I thank you very much for listening to me. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chikoma, for those remarks. Indeed, the conversation is changing to men being seen as part of the solution to violence. So thank you very much, Professor Chikoma and Professor Ruth, for your opening remarks. The purpose is to spread knowledge for each one of us to know the power of mindfulness and how it can effect lasting change in post-conflict settings in northern Uganda. A project was implemented by Professor Sarah Sali and Dr. Evelyn Lutwama as PI and co-PI respectively. Baron Oron was the lead trainer on this project from Stepping Stones. So Dr. Lutwama, you're welcome.
I want to welcome you to this presentation. So I appreciate that you've reserved the time to be able to listen to me. And in the process of presenting the research and the findings that we gathered in this project. Previous speakers have already mentioned that this is a project entitled From Violence and Victims to Voices and Visions, exploring the power of mindfulness to effect lasting change in post-conflict settings in northern Uganda. Just a simple explanation about this title. It's a title that targets mindset. It's a title that involves an attempt to revise the shortfalls and difficulties that people have experienced during war in order to produce a better mindset as a way forward for the people involved. So it was a partnership, and 3 institutions were involved. The first being the Department of Women and Gender Studies. At that time, it was the School of Women and Gender Studies. The principal investigator being Professor Sarah Sally. She is now a full professor, so she's the principal investigator, and I was the co-principal investigator myself, Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo. We worked in partnership with a UK-based organization named Salamander Trust, and one of its director is Dr. Alice Melbourne. But because they are UK-based, we had to work closely with an NGO that they associate with in Uganda. At that time, it was called Communication for Action and Results, CIFA, but by now it is mainly known as the Stepping Stones. We worked with a gentleman called Mr. Baron Oron as the lead trainer of the manual that I will be explaining to you, the biggest component of this intervention. This project was sponsored by the Mind and Life Institute in the US, which targets treatment, psyche and mind treatment of people in different scenarios and different contexts. So it was very critical that our project produced results that would reflect a treatment of the mind. That was our starting point. So it ran from 2019 up to 2025, and that seems like a long time, but of course, the start of the project was interrupted by the COVID pandemic. And for 2 years, we were tied in our homes in a lockdown, and we couldn't actually visit the field to be able to initiate the project activities. So in essence, therefore, we used about 3 to 4 years later to be able to collect data, to implement the methodology that I'll be talking to you about, and also to write up, findings that we collected over time. Briefly, this project is located in Gulu, an area that was affected by the LRA insurgents for more than 20 years. There was a lot of displacement and many effects of war that the people experienced for over 20 years. And this was the starting point for our project, an interest in an area that had been adversely affected by war. We did realize that war has its effects on men and women in different ways. Men and women experienced the violence within in different ways. And the aftermath of the violence also was experienced in a gendered way. And we found that although many interventions were taking place in Gulu, many NGOs visited the northern region to kind of work with affected communities, to resettle them, and also to ensure economic empowerment for them so that they can readjust, readjust to their normal lives. But what we found missing, there was a glaring gap in the attention that was being given to the psychosocial element of the people's lives. We found that there was very little attention that was being given to how the individual recovers from the conflict that they have gone through, because there were so many effects that they experienced. So how were they to recover from those experiences? And even though the women got some attention, the most neglected individuals in this case were the men. The NGOs, many of them were paying attention to women's needs, and the men felt forgotten. So the marginal effort to rebuild the identities of the men became our initial interest. How do we help the men to recover so that we can eventually establish positive masculinities which can then enhance better relations within the household and within the community? So therefore, the main aim of this study was to explore if post-war populations, particularly males, can develop pro-social and compassionate positive gender identities through using the stepping stones for peace and prosperity methodology. These are some of the specific objectives we set out to establish. The first one, we needed to interrogate notions of masculinities in post-war Gulu district, Uganda. The second one was to identify social drivers of post-war notions of masculinities in the Acholi sub-region. The third one was to examine the effects of particular masculinities on women, children, and the wider community, including the men themselves. Why? Because, you know, when you talk of men, it is a blanket statement. Within that category of men, there are many diverse masculinities, some of them as vulnerable as women's identities. So we were interested in knowing how the particular dominant masculinities, the effects they had in their relations on women, children, and the wider community, including the men themselves. And finally, the last objective was to document the extent to which the package that we were using, which is the stepping stones for peace and prosperity, was able to rebuild and reconstruct positive identities for both women and men. Because we found in the field that any upset of a relation is two-sided, and that the effects of violence were relational. The starting point was that the men, their identities had been destroyed and they were quite negative, but eventually we found that on the reverse, women's identities were also changing. They were changing, and therefore some of those changes were affecting the relations with the men, and so it became a vice versa kind of effect. We visited 3 sub-counties in northern Uganda, in Gulu specifically. The first was Omel sub-county in 2022. We visited Unyama in 23 and Awach in 2023. And how did we operate? We were 2 teams actually. We had a team from an organization at that time known as SIFA, but it has since changed its name. From this organization, the one that was dealing directly with Salamander Trust, we had an individual called a trainer. This is a person who knew how the manual of the stepping stones for peace and prosperity operated, because it is a very big manual with very many exercises and techniques which should enable mindset change. So there was a trainer who was then in charge of 4 facilitators. And I will explain later why we needed 4 facilitators, 4 community facilitators. From the Makere side, we had a researcher, either I or Professor Sarasali, and 4 research assistants to help with collecting data, especially the quantitative data, but also to help with studying the implementation process and seeing whether it is working out the way we expected it to work out. How we started the process is that in each sub-county, there was a village we chose, we sampled, and I'll explain how. When we visited that village, we invited the community members for a meeting, just an open meeting where we discussed and explained what our project was about. And in that meeting, individuals would then choose whether they want to work with us or not. We had already established that we wanted to have 4 groups, each of them of different age and gender, where we had a group made of young women, a group made of young men, old women, and old men, each composed of 20 members. So in this meeting, which we called the open community meeting, individuals chose to join those groups. And we spent about 2 months in each of those sub-counties working with the groups that had been constituted. So methodologically, therefore, we engaged a quantitative and qualitative approach. In the quantitative approach, we had surveys that we developed using scales borrowed from Connor Davidson and also the Perrin scale. But we boosted those scales with additional questions and statements that would fulfill our need as people on the project. Those additional statements were generated by us, the PIs, and then a member from Salamander Trust and a member from CIFA. The surveys laid a lot of emphasis on GBV because the entry point into this study area was an establishment that GBV cases were on the rise as a result of many factors, which we shall be exploring a little later. So the sampling of the study areas, especially the villages, were based on occurrences of GBV in the area. GBV was one of the most visible effects of the war that had occurred in Gulu. So that is how it looked like. We visited Awach, number 1 there, and the village we chose was Latwong. By the time we wrote our proposal, Latwong had a population of 1,236 people, and the cases reported there of GBV were 49 cases. Those were the highest occurrences within that sub-county. So we considered Latwong village as the area with the most dominant GBV cases. We also visited Unyama sub-county, where we chose Oding village. That one was constituting of 1,039 people, and it had 24 cases. Therefore, we treated that as the moderate scenario. Then we had Omel, where we have the village Bulkul-E with 976 population, and the cases were 15. So those were the least amongst the cases we were looking at. The survey engaged a 50-50 representation of females and males in the sense that there were 2 categories of respondents involved. There were respondents that we labeled non-participants. These are the respondents who were not going to benefit from the implementation of the stepping stones package. We only needed baseline information from them, which we could compare with information that we shall generate from the participant package. So for each sub-county, we had 10 non-participant respondents to the survey. And then from each sub-county, we had 20 respondents who were labeled participants. So those 20 then remained in the peer groups that I spoke of, which peer groups were made of age and gender differences. We had the younger men, younger women, older men, and older women. So that is how it looked like, both at the baseline and the end line. Now, on the qualitative side of things, we used mainly 3 data sources. One was an approach called a data collection approach called body mapping. we had a guide that we were using, and for each peer group, we had those research assistants speaking to the participants in Acholi, asking them questions, and then an individual amongst them would offer themselves to lie on broad pieces of paper so that they would draw a body map of that individual. So the statements that would be made or questions that would be asked, the answers would be filled onto the map of the body that was drawn. And we got a lot of information coming through the body mapping exercise. Then the second data source were meetings. We had pre-implementation meetings, especially stakeholder meetings, where we met with the community leaders at the sub-county level, LC chairpersons, CDOs, etc. We had a lot of exchange with them, and they would tell us a lot about what is within the communities. But we also had post-implementation meetings, and this was mainly in form of dissemination or follow-up, where we were asking community members whether the project has had any impact on them in their day-to-day lives. So those were also data collection sources. Then finally, we had the Stepping Stones for Peace and Prosperity package, which acted both as a data source, but also as an intervention methodology aiming to cause change. So how does the Stepping Stones work, therefore? Initially, I have to explain to you that this is a methodology aimed at supporting community members to create and develop a future collective strategic vision through using mindful techniques based on interpersonal neurobiology. So the aim, therefore, is that this package works in very simple ways, which I will explain, to try and change the mindset of those who benefit from it. It operates using 4 peer groups, those that I have already explained to you, and it has about 17 sessions and runs for about 2 to 3 months. Okay, so some of the techniques involved in this package: you have discussions, you have role plays, you have exercises, you have image creation, and through these techniques, the participants are encouraged to communicate their views. The community facilitators I mentioned work on triggering or facilitating a process of reflection where the participants begin to reflect on topical issues and issues relating to problems affecting them, so that eventually answers begin to emerge from these participants. So the psyche or the mind is the target for all the sessions involved. Some sessions, for example, test understanding of concepts. For example, concepts like trust. What does trust mean to the people involved in the exercise? What does confidentiality mean? What does love mean? What does human rights mean? For people like you seated here, of course, you have very academic answers to these concepts. But which answers do we generate from people in the communities? Remember, these are communities that are rural-based, and many of them are not highly educated. So what is the meaning of these concepts to them? These concepts turned out to be important in our understanding of why GBV is occurring within the households that were in the communities that we visited. For example, when love turns sour, in most cases, you will find GBV occurring. When trust is broken, in most cases, you will find instances of conflict and violence in the relations involved. So members began to give us what they understood about these concepts. And of course, we went on to share experiences. And some, for example, would tell us that broken trust involves when, for example, you trust your partner and your partner doesn't meet your expectation. One woman shared that she thought that love means that if her husband beat her up and then afterwards he bought her very nice things, sugar, cooking oil, nice food, then that was a sign of love, according to this lady. And so for us, our task was to have a discussion around that and, you know, try to make her understand that physical assault shouldn't be an understanding of love. And later on, we shall see whether that worked out or not. In other instances, we had a man explaining about service provision. Because, you know, when you go to hospital, you have trust that the personnel there will treat you and you will go home happy, treated. But this young man escorted his wife to the hospital for delivery and found no medical officer there. And when they tried to call the medical officer, because it was in the middle of the night, the officer said, well, I also have a wife and I am busy making babies as well. So at the end of the event, the man had to deliver the baby of his wife, and so he felt that his trust had been broken. The follow-up meetings we had established that actually when we had this training and this experience was shared, the local leaders picked interest in the case and they followed up on the doctor and the administration of the hospital. And so service delivery improved thereafter. There were other instances, for example, when neighbors were feeling that their trust was broken because the neighbors were allowing animals to go into their gardens and destroying their gardens. So those were instances where we were sharing, and this was happening through role play, through exercises, and a number of other techniques that this package offers. So this package, therefore, begins to target the reactions of people when their minds are provoked. Some of those reactions are annoyance. Some people react by, you know, bottling up emotions. Some people react by physical assaults, and that's when violence becomes very evident. Others engage in arguments and quarrels. And so the community becomes disturbed as a result of these reactions. Peace is destroyed. So through exercises and all those techniques that we have explored, this package begins to allow the participants to experiment with moments when they felt these reactions, which moments we will then subject to ways of dealing with these kinds of reactions, because these reactions upset relations at household level, but also at community level. These are some of the techniques that were shared within the package. People were taught the breathing exercise. For example, when you're so angry or when you're bottling things up and you have no one to talk to, the breathing exercise became very instrumental. Another exercise they had was the I statement, where instead of quarreling with people, you instead use very polite language. For example, I would like you to give me a moment so that I can speak with you, or I feel really upset when you don't listen to me. So the use of the I statement injected the personality of the person in their communications, and we shall hear later how that worked out for people when they went back to their homes. They also concentrated on those concepts and many other techniques that I can't explore. Okay. Participants were helped to see the negative feelings and that these feelings do actually affect their relations. This is a statement that we got from one of the peer groups where some younger men felt that their love was dwindling or disappearing because their wives kept demanding money from them, and yet, you know, they don't have the money. So that was one instance when they felt, well, why should I stay at home and face all these demands? So increasingly, love was lost between the young couple. In one of the groups, the peer groups of the peer group of the older women, the women expressed that they felt that the love was being lost between them and their husbands when their husbands failed to fulfill their domestic obligations. In the sense that, you know, you need food, you need firewood, you need all these resources within the home, but what the man is doing is just disappearing into the center and leaving you to make sure that all these needs are met. So women felt that that scenario alone affected their love towards the husbands, and therefore domestic violence was on the increase, because when the men came back home, of course, there were quarrels and fights over these occurrences. So there were a number of other sessions that would take place. Now, these sessions, for example, our perceptions. That is a session that went into examining how we look at the world. How do we want to look at it? Do we want to look at it in a negative light, or do we want to see it in a positive light? So techniques over that were shared, you know, so that people can learn to adhere to, you know, circumstances and have good relations. Our assumptions were also examined. The manual is very big, and there are many techniques, so I can't explore everything about it. So generally speaking, this manual encouraged participants to change their worldview in order to improve relations between themselves, between their spouses, and members of the community. Now, I initially told you that one of our objectives was to interrogate notions of masculinities in post-war Gulu district, and I told you the places where we were. So from the body mapping exercise, we managed to generate an understanding of what the people within Oding, Latwong, and Bulkur A thought would be the ideal man. These are the qualities they thought would describe an ideal actually man. They wanted the man to be hardworking, They wanted the man to have a wealthy family. They wanted the man to have a good home, have granaries where they can store food. The man should have orchards, should have animals, an adequate food supply, should be able to buy clothes for his family, should be able to provide good medical care for his children. This man should be highly educated. This man should also be a leader, especially a political leader. The man should be a household head and a breadwinner. He should own some means of transport and should be knowledgeable about traditional dances, traditional norms, regulations, and bylaws. He should be able to educate his children at the fireplace through riddles and proverbs. And his children should respect him, as well as him respecting his parents. He should be loved by his children, his parents, and community members. And he should be able to attend funeral ceremonies, as well as not being alcoholic. It was okay for them if the man was polygamous, but also a monogamous man was okay. And this man should be able to construct a bathroom and a urinal and a latrine. And he should also have good defense equipment, for example, an axe, a spear, a bow, arrow, and should be able to maintain a neat yard around his home. This man should be able to dialogue with his wife in cases of conflict. He shouldn't be abusive. And he should dress decently. Okay? His spouse needs to be chosen by his aunties and his uncles. And he should also know how to hunt. Okay? So those are the qualities they thought would describe a good Acholi man. Now, these are the qualities of the actual man that was within the region. Many of them had turned into thieves. They were not employed. They had no salary. A number of them were cheats. Some of them had become street thugs. There was a lot of redundancy and laziness. Many disliked farm work. Some of them liked to steal and sell off the domestic foodstuff, especially in the granary, but also the poultry at home. Some were selling of children's property, children and wives' property. Many of them could not pay the school fees for their children. They were non-committal. A number of them were not married. They were cohabiting, and they had many girlfriends and many bastard children, and were not paying bride price. Sexual immorality was high. They were using phones to womanize, and some of the personal savings were being spent to get as many young girls around them. Many of them did not own animals, land, or granaries. Education wasn't high on their priority list. Many of them had no leadership skills, no knowledge of traditional dances, riddles, or proverbs. And there was evident antisocial behavior amongst a number of the young people, especially the men. The beating of wives was very characteristic, and dialogue was very minimal between spouses, especially the young ones. The decency at home, the toilets, the bathrooms, they were not very evident. So there was a big negative image that we picked from the body mapping exercise. So I move into objective 2, which was to identify the social drivers of post-war notions of masculinities in Acholi sub-region. This negative image that came across, what had happened to the Acholi man that was bringing about such a negative image. So the 20 years of insurgencies in the region had their effect on the communities. One of them was that there was war-induced isolation from homes. And there is a testimony there that I can share about a 42-year-old. This is a man who was forced to run away from his home. And, he lost so many brothers and could not reunite with some of them after the war. But even after the war, when they tried to get back to their original home, they found that the land had been taken by other individuals and they were being chased away from their home. So this man expressed that he felt really helpless because he had no land. And yet land was a very significant asset within the Acholi communities. So eventually he relocated to another sub-county and bought himself a small piece of land. But he felt really unhappy that his parents died known as landless people. And that was all an effect coming from the war. Another effect related to that was the separation that they suffered, with families. Some members of the families were never seen after the war. And again, the emphasis of landlessness reoccurred in this. Okay, one person shared that when the insurgency erupted, we went to Pukoni, where my parents were by then. My brothers took off to Bunia. When we relocated and returned to our home village, we were chased away. Even when my parents went back to Omel, they could not, no, they pronounced that as Umel. They could not relocate to their land. They died landless. So while I lived in Pukoni, our temporary shelter was destroyed by the community and we were chased away. And now live here with other brothers, but we have no ancestral land. Now that was a very bad feeling, very touching, because where do you bury when you lose your children? What attachment do you have? You know, so a number of them were expressing a lot of sadness concerning their homelessness and their loss of identity in that regard. So as a result, another effect could be traced, and this was the incapacity to settle down and marry young girls. Where do you settle when you have no land? Because you have to provide a home for the bride. Again, where do you get what you will use as dowry to pay for the bride? Normally, the dowry or the bride price that is requested for are large heads of cattle. So without those assets, it became increasingly difficult for the young men to marry. One of them expressed that we lost all our land and we couldn't reclaim it. Many men are cohabiting because they cannot afford to marry. We lost all the animals which were a source of dowry. Other agricultural produces like cotton, which were the major source of income, all disappeared. So we are no longer growing cotton. Indeed, our visit in the field established that there were very few options, economic options. We could pass large chunks of land that seemed overgrown. And, you know, I asked the person who was transporting me, why do we have such big chunks of land with no people occupying them? And this person explained to me that, you see, that land could belong to an individual, just one person. And if you try to go and start growing any food on that piece of land, straight away you will be penalized for doing so. So a lot of land was in the hands of very few people, and the majority faced the problem of landlessness. Now, because this was happening, a number of men felt the need to vent their frustration. And some of the ways they did it, they went to do sports betting. Some of them would go to the machine called casino, where you put money and then you expect to win from it. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. Others turned to alcohol. Others had multiple partners. And this seemed a problem to their spouses, because the spouses argued that the resources in the home were used in very unproductive ways. And because of that, there were many domestic disagreements going on. Okay. One of them was the fact that the men were running away from the homes and having extramarital relationships outside of their marriages in order to, you know, reduce on the stress they were facing from their wives concerning the resources that the wives felt were being used in ways, in unproductive ways. So there are many instances that we picked from the gatherings where men were talking about the frustrations they were feeling. One of them was economic. Young men pointed out that they were not happy with their parents and grandparents because they were selling off land without involving them in decision making. The limited economic opportunities were forcing a number of people to sell off their land in order to generate some money. So when the sales would take place, the young men felt that the older men were making the decisions without involving them. And on the other side, women were also feeling left out in those decisions, because typically the Acholi woman was not a property owner, especially of land and cattle. So that grievance kind of was an offshoot from the economic depression that was being felt within their communities. Again, from an economic point of view, the younger men and women and the older women argued that the older men tended to want to take the biggest share of the harvest, and yet the growing of the food was largely done by the women. So there were disagreements over that, and sometimes those disagreements would end up in fights. And therefore, I asked the research assistants whether they agreed with these views. And this is one of the responses that I got. One of the research assistants that was working with the women, the older women in the group of the older women, expressed that they were quick to respond because some of the real women were either their relatives, in-laws, or even close friends. They felt that the community, she explained that the things that they are sharing are real. And that in her group, one of the women experienced an addition to her household in the name of a co-wife. And that presently, as she was attending the training, she was experiencing physical and emotional violence from her husband because the husband now wanted to stay with the new wife. And the husband wanted her to go away with the 5 children. And her life was beginning to be a nightmare. So the research assistant confirmed that the exchanges and experiences that were being shared were actually a reality in the lives of the participants. One of the other social drivers of the new identities, the new masculine identities we're seeing, was the large-scale attention that women got from NGOs and government immediately after the end of the war. They argued that the women were given money, they were given emotional support through those NGOs, and the men felt largely left out. One of them expressed that when people returned from camps, many of the NGOs that came in concentrated on women, leaving out the men. Yet men had lost many things. Women at home still demand from men the same things. And yet the men have nowhere to pick the money to meet those needs. Men have to educate the children, they have to feed them, but there's no money. That's why many men are so frustrated and they are resorting to alcohol. Another man also indicated that our women have benefited more from the recovery programs because they are the ones who benefit from the circles that were established. You work together in the garden. At the time of harvesting, the woman takes all the proceeds to the circle. When they share at the end of the year, you never see anything from the women's collection from the circle. This has created domestic unrest because men feel they are cheated. Okay, so those were the feelings coming from men, and feelings that were not being listened to because many of the interventions were targeting women. So the men that were part of this project were very happy that for a change, they've also been invited for some kind of intervention and an ear to hear, to listen to their grievances. Another driver was the erosion of checks and balances in the Acholi culture, which moderated the Acholi behavior. A significant aspect of Acholi culture was the fireplace meetings in the evening, where parents would sit with their children and mentor them on how to behave in society. It was argued that the fireplace had disappeared, the fireplace meeting had disappeared, and therefore controlling the young was very hard. Even when they waited for the boys to come back, some of them came back drunk from the centers. So it was very hard to talk to them, as one person indicates here. They say, when we were taken to the camp, our cultures and traditions all died out. Young boys no longer sit with their fathers on fireplaces to get knowledge. Even young girls have become very stubborn. You find one girl having over 5 boyfriends. Yet you struggle to keep your child in school only to hear that they have been arrested for defilement. So it is very painful, according to one respondent. Another respondent says that as the older members of community, they have lost control over the young men. Some young men have become agu. I hope I'm pronouncing it the right way. Agu is a term that was used for individuals that were thought to have become thugs, very notorious, stealing from community members, beating them up. In their view, the agu were mannerless young people in community. So there were some agu within those communities, but the majority of the agu could be found in the town of Gulu. And it was very insecure in some streets of Gulu to move around, because the agu will find you and harass you and you will lose property to them. So agu became a big concern to the older people, and they felt hopeless about, controlling them. Obviously, the last point there talks about prostitution, which has already been highlighted in the above point. Young girls think that the way to make money is to sell their bodies. But this is an effect from the camp, the lives they had in the camps, where, it was very hard and the way to survive was to sell your body. Another driver indicated was the redefined feminine identities. Again, this was associated with camp life. Many believed that when the women returned from the camps, they had lost quite a number of characteristics and values that Acholi culture attached to them. Many of them, according to the respondents, were disrespectful of men. They had learned to live on their own and sustain themselves, so they didn't need any other person to talk to them about their ways. And here are some expressions from the community. For example, some felt that many men no longer control their wives. And because they can't control their wives, they feel traumatized. Some older men argued that their wives were just used to free things during the camp days. And so they expect that even their return within the homes would be followed by free things. Of course, the free things they are talking about, the education of children, the domestic supplies, money to take care of themselves. So those are the free things that the men are referring to. Why the men are calling them free things? Because they themselves are in a very hard economic situation, that when such demands are made, it just frustrates them, and so they think these are free things. Okay, so they carry on to say that the wives have failed to readjust to the original characters before the war occurred. One of them thought that most of the groups, this is the research assistant, I asked why people had those feelings about the Acholi people. Why were they seeing the Acholi people as negative these days? And one of the research assistants who was working with the younger women explained that I think most of the groups have negative descriptions of the real Acholi woman and man, because that is exactly what the real man and woman is within the communities. Many women have taken up drinking, and so some of them are alcoholic. Many of them use verbal and physical abuse within their homesteads. Many are facing poverty, and quite a number of them are illiterate. So we found that the violence within the home was relational. Sometimes it was coming from the men, and sometimes it was coming from the women. Lastly, I want to talk about the disillusionment and hopelessness that a number of the participants had. One of them shared that our daughters were abducted and given out as sex gifts for both the LRA rebels and the government forces. So those that were able to return came back with fatherless children. These children were referred to as alum-lum. Now, the label alum-lum was so negative because once you were an alum-lum, being accepted within the communities where the young women were coming to resettle was very hard. Unfortunately, some of those alum-lum had grown up to become young men and young women. So that stigma was following them into their adulthood. And so it also compounded the feeling of disillusionment and hopelessness. There are a number of instances where that was happening. But at the bottom line, the research assistant attached to the older men's peer group summarized the entire feeling of depression that was around this as emanating from the fact that there is a lot of poverty, ignorance, adaptation to Western culture, and biased thoughts of inferiority that came from the camp life, which resulted from such drivers of the current identities of the Acholi man. So the stepping stones, therefore, came in to address the negative feelings, the bad experiences. It came in to try and change what seemed as a bleak life. Exercises were used. Breathing exercise, for example, was very instrumental. One man testified that after learning how to use the breathing exercise, he actually went home and taught it to his partner. And often after a long day and after stressful experiences, they would use this breathing exercise, to soothe themselves before going to bed in preparation for the next day. What does this do, therefore? This breathing exercise kind of composes your mind and your body to be able to face the challenges of the next day. Another older woman said that for her, whenever she had an argument with her husband, now she had learned some techniques of dealing with that argument. She would use that breathing exercise to calm herself, where in reverse, she would have been in a stiffer argument with her husband. So such an exercise began to transform the lives of those who were known as the participants of the project. There were a number of techniques that were shared, so those techniques were beginning. So the techniques helped to change the lives of people, and I want to now explore ways in which these the people's lives were changed. We had a visit recently back to these communities, and we were having a follow-up on how has it changed for people in the communities. One of the biggest achievement was that from the training, the groups did not break up. They stayed together and worked together to pass on skills they had adopted in the training to the wider community. Some of the expressions they made within the groups, especially in the final dramas that were shared with the entire community, gave birth to results. One of them was improved infrastructure. In that follow-up meeting, the LC1 chairperson of Bulkur A, that is in Umel sub-county, told us that as a result of our intervention, they were able to lobby government officials because government officials had watched a role play depicting the need for a road within the area. They were able to lobby for that road, and the road had been established 3 years down the road. They were able to have a borehole drilled in their area because women showed in their plays the need for water and the long distances they were incurring in order to get water for domestic use. So government officials that were in that meeting, the first meeting where they gave a role play on the need for sources of water, went back and lobbied for a borehole, and it was drilled. So fresh water was more available within the area. The LC chairman also told us that the team is still lobbying for the establishment of a health center. Remember the story of the man who had to deliver the wife himself. All these touched people because we were inviting local leaders to some of these performances. So as a result, they are lobbying for additional health centers to be established within the area. And so on a community level, this is another impact of our intervention. In Omel again, the CDO said that our intervention was able to open up the minds of those who were to benefit from a government intervention called the PDM. She argued that if you get a group of people and you give them the PDM money, and the group of people doesn't know how to use the money, then it's going to be wasted. But a number of these peer groups applied for the PDM money. They got it, and she testified that they were utilizing the PDM money profitably. So for us, that was a very good achievement, because then we were able to change young men who spent a lot of time in the centers drinking and not doing much, transforming them into productive individuals who are opening up gardens and making sure that they grow socio-economically. And so personal growth was another outcome of this intervention. This young woman had a dream. One of the exercises was to dream about yourself 5 years down the road. So from that dream, she told us that she dreamt to be a leader within her community. So after our training, she actually tried to materialize that dream, and she was able to shed off her shyness. So she contested, and she wants to become the LC chairperson. She wants to be the local council at level 3 of the local council establishment. So at an individual level, we saw transformation in people's ambitions through techniques like dreaming and backlighting. Further, another one wanted to own some property. So what she did was to interest other women to engage in a bricklaying project. They did that. They were able to sell the bricks, and she managed to get money to buy herself oxen and an ox plow. ox plows are very useful equipment in northern Uganda because they use them to prepare for the cultivation. So this woman was able to save money from using her abilities to mobilize others and to mobilize funds. And this she attributed to the program that we took to them. Some young men testified to the fact that they are spending less time at the centers. Actually, when you want to mobilize, the first place you go is the centers because you will find so many of them. The centers that I'm talking about are located along the roadside. An area has a number of shops. And then, you have all the activities going on there. You have the butcher, you have the bars, you have so many things happening in the center. So beyond the centers, you have the homesteads. And the homesteads are so widespread, they are not as close as the ones you're used to, the 50 by 100 kind of neighborhood. There's, you have one home here, then a very long distance, then the next home. So centers are areas where people walk from their homesteads and then they come and gather to play, to chat, and do many things. So a number of young men reported that they are spending less time in the centers and they're opening up gardens for profitable activities. One of them said that before the training, he really didn't like to grow any food. But after the training, he was able to open up some land and planted a cassava plantation. And right now, he actually makes money out of that plantation. Cassava seems to be a very common food. When you go to the restaurant or to the hotel to ask for a meal, they will provide you with the chicken stew and cassava, which is pounded. It looks like posho, but it is actually cassava. It's very tasty, by the way. I don't know the local name, but I ate it several times and it was very tasty. So this young man was able to open up a plantation and a number of villagers were buying cassava from him. And that to us was a very great transformation from the participants. There were also reduced cases of GBV. In all the communities we visited, we found that although initially there was some NGO intervention concerning GBV, the changes were not as significant as when our intervention went in, because it was argued that the perpetrators were part of the trainees or the participants. And many of them realized that beating up their partners was not a good thing from the techniques that we were sharing. So cases of GBV were really reducing. One participant explained that he knew of a neighbor who kept beating up the wife every time he came home drunk, but he was so afraid of talking to the neighbor until the training empowered this participant, and the participant got the courage to talk to the neighbor. And right now they are happy that the domestic violence that was occurring in that home reduced. In another setting, one of the catechists explained to us that there was a couple that kept fighting all the time. This one morning, he found them fighting naked. And because the catechist was a participant, he got the courage to go. And when they saw him and they knew him as a catechist, they ran inside and dressed up. But he was able to, they used to fight so much to the point that this morning they probably jumped out of bed and started fighting. So this catechist was able to counsel them and has been counseling them so many times. And he reported that as he was coming for the meeting, the follow-up meeting, he met the same couple and they were so happy to see him. The man gave him 5,000, thanking him for the counseling sessions. And he feels that they are now a peaceful couple. So cases of GBV really went down because this intervention now is complementary to other interventions. NGOs like Youth Alive are working within these areas, and they are working closely with the government. They've established parasocial workers whom the community members report to in terms of knowing couples that are very violent. So the parasocial workers work closely with the security organs, and therefore the culprits are now very afraid of being perpetrators of GBV. So that is a complementary attribute that comes back to our intervention. And so we were happy to note that cases of GBV within all the study areas that we visited had reduced. Cases of drunkenness had also reduced. One woman said that she advised her young boys to join the training, which made it possible for them to reduce their drinking problem. As a result, therefore, they were also saving funds and resources because a lot of funds go into drinking. There was also better gender relations within the households.
One young woman shared that she always had arguments with her husband, and her marriage was experiencing a lot of stress. So she then decided to go back to her natal home to stay with her mom. When the training started and she was invited for the training, a lot of the techniques and the styles that were shared showed her that she can actually use those particular techniques to settle the upheaval that was within her marriage. And so therefore she returned to her marital home, and every time her husband came back drunk and wanted to start a fight, she never reciprocated. Instead, she took on a very gentle character and, used techniques like the I statement to woo her husband. Instead of arguing back with him, she would instead say, "Oh, my husband, oh, how much I love you. You can come and be with me." So the intimacy increased, and as she spoke, she was carrying a child. So she showed us the child and said, "Oh, do you see now the fruit of using the techniques given to me by the stepping stones for peace and prosperity?" Everybody laughed at that point. It was a very interesting sharing she had. But then she went ahead to show us 4 other young people and explained to us that, previously the men were dodging. They were spending time in the center and they were not coming home. So the young girls, they were getting married to them but were not getting pregnant, and this was a great concern for them. But after the training, their husbands were spending a little more time with them, and they showed us about 4 babies. Don't you see, the collection of babies that we managed to get after the training, and they seem to be very proud about it. So yes, that was we thought that was a good a good experience. Those findings were mainly coming from testimonies that we were collecting from the follow-up meeting in the different villages of Oding, Bulkur A, and Lutwama. But there are other findings that we were able to establish, especially from the quantitative research. One of them was improved teamwork. We found that people were more willing to work together to resolve a problem. For example, again from the testimonies, we established that some of those peer groups were converted into working groups where they were visiting gardens of each other and cultivating them in a cycle. So therefore, teamwork improved not only in productive ways but also in social ways. When people were losing loved ones, the participants were there as social capital to support them. Another improvement was to do with resilience, especially at the individual level. We found that the statistics indicated that people's resilience improved. It improved, and they were able to adapt a lot more to changes compared to before. So there's improved adaptability to change, which is very critical, especially for a community that had lost hope. Being able to adapt to change, the new life, and finding ways of surviving in these new lives was very critical. And this training managed to build their abilities to adapt to change, to be resilient to problems and challenges, so that they are able to rebuild their lives. And hope therefore began to be constructed much better than it was before. We also found out from our research, from the surveys, that there was improved creativity for survival, where people in the testimonies they were saying they were spending a lot more time in the centers drinking. The statistics began to show that a number of them were dropping some of those habits. Some were not dropping them completely. Some were spending less time at the drinking places and accompanying their spouses to the gardens so that they could work together. And so therefore we found that they were devising many means of improving their economic situation so that they were more productive, and it was participatory in nature, all coming from the fact that their minds had been changed. The way they were looking at things, their perceptions, their assumptions had changed, and that was critical. And therefore, in a way, it was beginning to heal them mentally, to give them hope. Okay. Then also there was improvement of management of stress. At first, most of the respondents indicated frustration and anxiety over particular problems. But by the end line, we could see and establish that a number of them had learned a few techniques like patience, a few techniques that could allow them to endure and also manage their stress. The breathing exercise is one of them that played a critical role in management of stress. In a nutshell, therefore, we find that this intervention was very transformative, not only at the individual level but also the community level, offering solutions to not only the households but the community at large and ultimately at the district level. So thank you so much for listening to me. I would like now to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rukundo. I think this has been a really very good description of the project and what you did and how you intervened and the effects or the impacts, you want to call them, the project. I think you saw that Dr. Rukundo went through, of course, the findings from each objective, from the notions of masculinity, the drivers, the positive changes that were observed, especially the mindfulness techniques that were given to the community members. It was really a good and interesting discussion. So I would like now to invite any questions, comments, clarification. You kindly say your name. Tell us your name and what you do, what they call designations and type.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama-Rukundo. Quite often we have been talking of decolonizing research and all that. And to me, this is the real decolonizing research. Using global South perspectives for global South problems. I like the way you use simple concepts. To me, they look simple because quite often when you are doing research, you want to think for difficult concepts. I like how you juggled concepts like love, trust, then also disillusionment and hopelessness. How, for example, the lack of love and trust can, result into people getting disillusioned, getting hopeless. I would like to talk to the aspect of the AGU, because I like critical masculinities. That is my bread and butter. The aspect of the AGU, who are the floating populations, people who lack identity, they are identityless, they cannot trace their kith and kin. And in most of the researches in northern Uganda, you find that they are looking at, they are overemphasizing the vulnerability of women, leaving men aside. But having been part of a study that was looking at the transformative approach to understanding post-war conflict, post-conflict healing, and returning to normal, I really understand your way of understanding critical masculinities, understanding men as vulnerable and also as social constructs whose identities and ways of lives are affected equally in a situation whereby the social construct is highly affected by war. Thank you so much. Mine was quite of a comment.
Thank you, Akram. Sam, you want to say something as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Christian Samuel Katwesije. I'm happy with Dr. Evelyn's research and findings, but I have only 2 questions, and I want to also relate them to I call them synonyms, or I call them our language of Okuiriba, the jargons. These alum, people we call alum, as you've cited them in your research, they ought everyone, they also have life. How can we validate their experiences that they are victims of post-war conflict societies to help them to, get a better living in life? As you were doing these things for the societies and engaging local and stakeholder people, what did you do for them? Then, to build up and add on to Akram's point, these AGU people we call, what forms of positive masculinities can you advise or give to them in that in the context that they are in Gulu right now? You don't depend or just say you're going to be met by their AGU and you're going to lose property, you're going to have problems with them. How can we invest in mindset awareness or something we can do for them to ensure that also their life begins to be better in a way or the other? Because we can't blame them for the issue of the war that happened, which they didn't know about. Let's look at them as victims rather than proprietors of the war itself. Thank you.
Elvis? Yes.
I'm called Yosia Elvis Mafijiri. Thank you very much, Doctor, for the wonderful presentation. It's really eye-opening for us to know what's happening in Gulu and after the conflict which happened in Gulu. But then I have a simple question. It's about, earlier on you talked about women calling battling a sign of love, whereby most women were beaten by their husbands and later maybe they awarded gifts. So also talked about the training that they passed through during the project. So did you happen to hear the replies or the comments about how women are now differentiating between love and what is not love in terms of their rights? Because earlier on you said that at first the women were saying that, if you are battered, it's a sign of love, someone's loving you. So they were conforming, accepting violence. So after the training, did you happen to hear that nowadays women are differentiating between what is love and what is not love in terms of violence? Are they conforming again to violence, saying that it's love or it's not love? Thank you very much.
I think Dr. Lutwama can respond to how many are those? 5 questions?
Thank you everyone for your comments. It shows me that you are quite attentive throughout the presentation. I do appreciate that. Akram, I really commend your observation. I think it will really inform my analysis as well. Thank you so much. I would appreciate if you share some of the articles and write-ups that your team, I believe you were also doing some research in Hulu. Yes, that your team has written on the subject. Thank you. Samuel speaks of the alumlum or the the fatherless children, and he discourages the fact that they should be stigmatized, which is a good practice, and that is one of the targets of the stepping stones for peace and prosperity. In there is a game or an exercise called Who is Labeling Who? This exercise involves individuals in a group to wear cardboard the back and then start moving around, and then individuals begin writing what they think of you on the cardboard. Okay? So this game showed that those individuals who got very bad labels, their emotions were disturbed. They were unhappy. They felt disrespected. They felt neglected, etc. And those who got the good labels felt very happy and empowered. So this exercise, Who is Labeling Who, points to the argument that this package presents, that it is very bad to label. Labels destroy identities, they destroy self-esteem and confidence. So that game kind of encouraged the community members to step away from the issue of labeling. When we had a follow-up visit, members said that in the past, there was a lot of gossiping. For example, if you were a foreigner in the community, it was easy for community members to see you as, for example, an alumlum. And based on that, you would be kind of discriminated against. Okay? So this exercise tried so hard to impact on participants to desist from labeling others and using those labels as destructive measures the personality of the others. We heard from members that the gossip had really reduced and that the community members were beginning to see gossip as a bad thing. So I pray that that can improve on the way people are looked at. Of course, that also goes back to the other issue that the perspectives of people were being examined. What perspective do you have, and how can that perspective be changed by the package? What forms of positive masculinities can the project allow us to see? And this is a question from Sam. Sam, that is where we started in the body mapping exercise. We asked participants what they thought the ideal actually man should look like. So it isn't for us to tell them that this is how the actually man should be, but it is for them to tell us whom they would really appreciate to be a positive masculine being within their cultures. And there were many characteristics there. I mentioned them. I don't think I need to go back to that. Okay? Mafikiri wanted me to comment on the new definitions of love. Of course, the negative definitions of love were subjected to different exercises, which in the long run impacted on the perceptions about love. Because people were sharing and discussing and critiquing each member's position on what they understand love to be. By the end of the exercise, it wasn't us, the implementers, telling them what love should look like. It was them now redefining what they think love should look like. Some testimonies have already depicted that. The woman with the baby showing off her new baby, how now she's spending more quality time with her husband, and therefore you see the fruit. And she told us 4 others also have the fruit. So for them, they felt now love was growing in that regard. Okay. Others mentioned that they were now spending some time in the gardens together with their spouses. Originally, the spouses were spending a lot of time at the centers. Now they were coming with them to the garden and helping them to garden. The others expressed that there was more dialogue within the household. And for them, that was a big improvement from previous relations. All those were indicators of love for them. Then Evelyn was inquiring whether violence can completely be cured. That is an answer I cannot give. But many efforts work towards mitigating violence, okay, and reducing its occurrences. I've given you many instances that show that the occurrences were reducing. And that is the goal. Let us reduce, and if we can, mitigate. If we are lucky, then they will go away completely. Like one village that we visited, that was Bulkul A, where because they had para-social workers who were monitoring and kind of taking culprits to book, everybody there testified there was no beating anymore. No beating. The moment you beat, you'll be reported. So in that case, I can say, yes, the violence kind of disappeared. But I want to take note that it wasn't only our project that brought about that, but a concerted effort of our project, government intervention, and other NGO intervention. Can education play a role? Indeed, it can. This project is evidence that if you create awareness, if you educate and sensitize people, change can occur. The vivid example of change. Why were men neglected in interventions? I think Brenda has mentioned that immediately after the war, so many NGOs poured into Gulu, and many of them were women-focused. There is a big percentage of NGOs that pay a lot of attention to women's needs, which is justifiable because women carry a big bulk of responsibilities on their shoulders. And remember, our research did reveal that a number of men had left the responsibilities and never reclaimed them after the war. So that intervention was very critical. However, after an expanse of time, men are now projecting that, well, they feel left out, and they also have needs that have to be addressed. Consequently, the need.
Thank you, Lutwama.
I am Eric Jemba is my name. I am happy to be here with my contemporary. We started a bachelor's together, though I've just landed to her level recently. I'm so glad to have her engage the performing arts where we started, engage the theories of drama into this engagement. She talked about traditional and culture having been lost. We very well know that cultures are lost because of the technologies that have come, like social media has taken away many roles that would be played by cultural habits. So I enjoyed you engaging some of these dramatic elements to get that information from that rural community. Mine is about, like Brenda talked about the boy child. We are most times beaten. And no one comments about our beating. We have been beaten. You see, the power, we are here talking about power. in a way of how we can live harmoniously. So the girl seemed to have the psychological power, and as the boy child, children, we have that much physical power. So it's about the harmony that we harmonize the mind and the body, as in the physical and the psychological, to cultivate this mindful that the project is projecting. Like I teach dance at Performing Arts, and I teach a discipline called dance movement therapy. So here we are so much interested in connecting the mind, the feeling of someone, the thinking, and the body. So unless there is that harmony in the two, we are bound to lose everything in humanity. So I am here to recommend my senior to having gotten all this mileage. And finally, I would like to say that in the rural communities, emotions rule over logic. And I'm saying that education in most cases, we bring a lot of logic that is not respected in the rural communities. All is not understood. So that's my comment. I'm appreciating whatever you've said, but my definition of love, if I have to, sometimes when I've just said that the boy child is most times beaten more than the girl child these days. True or false? My definition of love is living for safety. Because if I love you and you cannot accommodate me, I leave you for our safety. I love you by leaving you. You understand? So to make it very clear, there are many things that are happening politically. But if we are all adults here, we are voters. If you examine how many people participate in the politics, like go to vote, they are less than those who. So because they love their lives, they love their country, they don't want to engage in something that they may not win from. So love is living for safety. Thank you.
That's an interesting one, Dr. Jemba. The social workers sometimes tell us that getting away is also a safety measure. If you feel you have been abused, sometimes getting away is safer than staying in a relationship that is violent, where one of you might kill or hurt another.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
That's why I commend those people who went to centers and left for safety.
Sometimes it is necessary.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evelyn. My name is Lutwama Magezi, a student at School of Social Sciences. So I would want to first appreciate your presentation. You spoke about the inclusion of men. Most times when we hear about the GBV, we usually think it's about women, but I appreciate that men have been included in this. Then I want to speak about the fact that these men have faced, there's been war in Gulu, and there have been effects that have happened, but as well, we see that there are social structures and social constructions that when you combine the effects of war and also the social constructions on men have brought about the pressure. There is that pressure where when you asked about the ideal man and the actually man, you realize that what an ideal man is what the society has constructed. So sometimes men don't know where to go and don't know even where to go and speak. Then you also spoke about the counseling part. Since we are looking at the mind and the psychic of the person, you spoke about the mind and looking at where you said that there is a niche where they were cancelled and a woman and the man then they try to appreciate this man. I'm trying to inquire, are there safe spaces in Gulu? If they are there, given that there is that incident, if a man can also go and open up and speak and be free, just like a woman does, just like you spoke to those men and they were open, as she asked. So I feel like it's something that would help if those safe spaces are there where a man can go and as well a woman can go without being judged or anything. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Magezi. Okay, maybe we get two more and then Dr. Evelyn can respond to those ones.
Okay. I also want to appreciate Dr. Evelyn so much for this initiative because it's really amazing. And I just want to, okay, my name is Sanyu Monica at the College of Social Science. And as I see that the project is responsible for the northern Uganda, and after seeing this impact in these areas, my question is that how is there hope for reaching other areas, or the project is ending? Because if we see that these areas have transformed and the target according to the title is northern Uganda, even other areas will be reached. Oh, thank you.
Okay. I'm coming to this side after here. Yes.
Okay, thank you very
much. Name, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ojampe Kavet.
Ojango.
Jambo.
Ojambo, okay.
Yes, Ojampe Kavet. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I just have a question. Concerning on your study and research, we see that women were more participative than the gender on which the research was all for. How was that gender impacted? That is the main. And recently, I and my team were in Agago, a place called Omia Pachua, for another certain mission of the gospel, to preach the gospel. However, my question and my concern was on one of the, should I say, instruments you used to counsel the people while you used eye contact. Do you also mind when you put, like, to encourage the families to pray together? Thank you very much.
Okay. You have a question as well?
Yes.
Okay. One last one. Then she responds to those and we take another round.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kabengwa Eric, a student of Biomedical Laboratory Technology from COVAB. So mine is, I would like to first thank Dr. Evelyn for the wonderful presentation. And she has really elaborated that in the aftermath of every conflict, there are very deep psychological wounds. And my point that I want to talk about is extracted from the connection between fathers and sons. In what she said that recently fathers would come together with sons at the fires and have a fireside conversation, which she says that it is now phasing out. In whatever you're seeing, we see that the female gender is very empowered. And as the boys or as the males, it remains that it is only our fathers where we would get some knowledge and empowerment. But if that is also phasing out, is there any way that you've tried out to see that this is back? Because if it all phases out, we are going to have a world or a choli where the ladies are very much empowered and the female and the males are not empowered at all. Yet at a later time, it is these boys or it is these boys who are going to become husbands of these ladies that are what? Over empowered. So I don't know, we should try as much as possible to ensure that in whatever we're doing, even the male gender is so much uplifted so that we have a balance, not to have a family where where one of the colleagues said that nowadays the males are also beaten. Because if the ladies are very much empowered, it means that is what's going to come on board. We shall have families where wives are going to be beating their husbands, because the law typically protects the females. I submit. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I think let I've been taking 5 people. Those are 5. Let Dr. Evelyn respond to those.
Yeah, I want to agree with everyone that the attention that women are getting, if it is seen as great, it's not accidental. If you go back to the days when gender equality was never thought of, there was no attention to women at all. So the attention to women is a deliberate move that has been geared by the women's movement through NGOs, through the government, through all structures. So in the same vein, because some success has been established, some men have become vulnerable in the process. And therefore, as women initiated their movement, men also have to initiate some kind of movement, and that is what has been detailed. You know, the different forms of organizations that are working to empowering vulnerable masculinity. But I must mention that not all men are vulnerable, because the societies we live in are still patriarchal. And the definition of patriarchy is male dominant. So we are talking of a very small percentage of vulnerable men. Why this project looks like there's a big expanse of men suffering, it's because it is a very unique setting, a post-war setting, in which the war affected both women and men, but the women have been treated in many measures by different organizations. However, there was an assumption that the men are okay. That's why this project comes in, to draw attention to the men. Therefore, I want to draw your attention back to the social drivers which cause these men to be in such a vulnerable position. It isn't really necessarily the case that women just woke up and they are starting to beat up their husbands and they are so violent to their husbands. It is something that is happening within certain circumstances, which circumstances we must understand, and therefore find ways of rectifying those circumstances. If, for example, it is economic depression for men, how can we encourage the men to get out of that depression? Those are the productive ventures that the men were talking of. Well, I used to spend time drinking at the center. Now I'm not doing that. I'm going to the garden. I used to run away from the home. Now I'm actually working with my wife to make sure that we get something out of the garden. So the attempts to change your habits and patterns become the definition of change in your life. And this change, although we are looking at making the men become more positive masculinities, it is hard to do it on your own as a man. Gender relations are two-sided. Both women and men have to change in order to create change. If you want a changed man, you have to contribute. Don't you hear often people saying that a woman can make or destroy a man? How does that happen? The relations that we engage in. I hope, Eric, that I have that position. Eric also further says, who will mentor the young people, especially the young men? Those programs are on radio, they are in communities, they are in bars, New structures are coming up. For example, in Buganda, we only knew that the Senga would educate the girl about their sexual life, about their marriage life. Now we have coaches who have decided that they are going to educate the boys. So new structures are coming up, and new ways of dealing with the problem are emerging. Is there any prayer? Or Jambo is asking. I, I, I believe that the different exercises, some of them can open up for prayer. As I said, we don't go and dictate to people what they do. Only we empower the people to be able to come up with different ways of their problem. And Daniel is wondering whether there is a chance for other areas. Daniel, the funding expired. This is the last we are using it, but we can sit down and write more proposals. Hopefully Trump will open up, get some funding. Maybe even other states can do that. And Natkunda is wondering about the spaces where men can go and talk about their problems. They are very limited. If there are not even that many in Kampala, now imagine in Oding, Latwong, and Bulpur, where I was. The spaces are very limited. Actually, our project gave them the best space for them to talk about things that are really pressing them. In the stakeholder meeting, the first meeting we had, the leaders thanked us endlessly for remembering the men. So I believe that this was a good opportunity for them. Abia is wondering when the men are using the I statement. Indeed, it was troublesome for them. Because, using the I statement kind of questions your masculinity in the Acholi culture. The Acholis must speak like men, They must be assertive, etc., etc. So introducing them to using the I statement was a little bit of a challenge. But if you had to stay in the training, you had to learn how to use it. And so some attested to experimenting with it. However, more women use the I statement than men because it came more naturally and easy to the women compared to the men. Again, you're wondering, how did we manage to get the men to open up? That is one of the intentional dimension of this methodology. It is aware that age can get in the way of participation. If you group old people with young people, the old will take over. Then the young will not be able to express themselves. Gender is another dimension. If you group women and men, the men may take over. The women won't be able to speak. So intentionally, this methodology breaks up the group in terms of age and gender. And every exercise is conducted in a peer group independent. In fact, it goes so far as to dictate that whichever community facilitator will be working with a group, that community facilitator has to be of the same age, same gender as the group. So that means we had community facilitators known as younger women, older men, younger men, older women. And that dictation went as far as the research assistants, because they would sit into the sessions and follow up what's going on. Again, we made sure that they were of the same age and group, making it possible for the participants to freely interact. And also at the beginning of the package, there are many games to make people relax. The very initial aspect of this package is to get rid of your ordinary name and get a pet name, or what they call adjectival name. Some people chose to be called Mango, others Dog, others Popo, whichever you felt comfortable with. So that kind of this deconstructed hierarchy within the group, and that really relaxed them and made it easy for them to play, because many times we had intervals of play and games so that people can relax, be able to. So that's how we dealt with that. Dr. Jemba mainly made the comment. Those ones we shall take into consideration. The aspect of living for safety. Love is living for safety. Those are things we shall think about.
Yes, Comfort, you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you so much, Dr. Evelyn. I wanted to ask that how can we empower the AGU as agents in addressing the GBV within the communities, as we can see that most of the AGUs don't listen to their family members. At the same time, they don't listen to the community leaders, and they have been causing a lot of fear to people. And so how can we engage them in the combat against the GBV? Thank you.
Thank you, Comfort. Any other person with a question online?
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn. My name is Nahana Jairin, a graduate from Social Sciences. You talked about games and how other people are affected negatively. I want to know whether you dealt with their mental health, because some of them might have been left depressed. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Me, I just want, Evelyn is my name, I just want to supplement on how we can prevent violence. I think we can preach the gospel to those people about holiness and righteousness, and this can reduce violence.
Okay.
Thank you, Evelyn. Sam, you want to add?
Yes, my professors. First of all, I don't want to be misquoted. I am a feminist, and I'm saying this, but at some level, I think feminism has overdone it on the side of women. So if we flip the narrative, and we see it, what we are comparing as toxic masculinities, these ideal things of what a man is supposed to be and what not to be. You're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to be this. Fine, men are weak and they can do this. But me, I have a thought that the fact that women have this onboarding a lot that is on their side, they look at it as like a weapon against even the men themselves. In that you'll see that even if a man is not wrong, they'll use mockery to it in the guise of harassment to it. So how are we going? Because now we have. I'm not saying we have already overdone feminism, but I see that's where it's getting. So now that's why we are in these discussions of boy child, boy child, boy child, because we are all seeing that we are overdoing it for the women, right? How about we also think about strategies to be like, yeah, not everything is considered feminism, because everybody who studies one unit in gender studies goes and says, now I know what gender equality is, and then they they come out with their own propaganda. So let me conclude this by saying feminism is something that we need to deeply understand its principles and ethics, so that we better determine what we are dealing with. Otherwise, it is going to turn into a pull and push factor of men versus women, over this, below that, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the crisis of masculinity, which people have been talking about, men not accepting who they are, that they're also vulnerable, that they're on pressure financially, as Dr. Evelyn has said. That is the crisis of masculinity, which is also picking up and taking us into this discussion. One last question.
Thank you so much for all the comments and questions that you've been sending over to me. I think Chienge's comments are very useful, and they are echoing the aspect of religion and how religion perceives the stability within homes and, a peacemaker. Understanding the family system is also very crucial, because then it lets us know the expectations we have towards our husbands and towards our wives, and how to deal with upsets of those expectations. I think those are very critical observations. Nakanwaji would like to know or whether we dealt with people's mental health. This entire package is dealing with mental health actually, because it is informed by that triangle that is there, that triangle of mental health, advanced by Dr. Dan Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry. So this triangle you see looks at the brain and the body and how that relates with the mind in relationship. So there is no way you can deal with relationships unless you are targeting the mind, which is housed within the body. I remember one of the commenters here, Dr. Jemba, said through dance, they target, the unified relationship between what the body is communicating and what the mind is saying. So in instances where the participants were greatly bruised by the experiences they went through, there were games that were role play and other statements that were encouraging the participants to overcome that. Techniques of communication, techniques of dealing with stress that were trying to empower the participants to overcome their vulnerability. And from the testimonies that I have shared, quite a number of the participants felt much more up to it to deal with the situations within their home. And I think that's some kind of treatment of the mind. And so we have seen success stories where somebody was working as an individual. Now they feel, no, we should work as a group, building their teamwork. That's already a sign of recovery from isolation. When they decide, for example, to build their resilience in terms of deep trouble, when they manage their stresses through different games and exercises, they are already repairing their minds. They are not sinking into depression, into hopelessness. So suicide rates are reducing. Hope is growing. And that's already effort of building mental health. So I believe that this package was a very ideal package to deal with situations of hopelessness, of stress, of giving up. There is much more hope in the community when we left compared to when we just arrived there. The AGU. The package, the project, projects are short-lived. They have a time span. So the best that we could do within the project was to interest people to join. And I remember in one of the villages, Oding, we invited everyone to the open community meeting where we shall select participants. And many young men were not interested. They didn't want to come join us. In the same Oding, a certain gospel had gone around that we had come with a lot of money to turn people in that village into homosexuals. So they were looking at us very suspiciously. And so they refused to come. And some young men who seemed very drunkard came to the meeting and started to communicate these things to us. You want to destroy our family. You want to do this and that. So we were lucky to start off with some, but not the full numbers, especially the men. Not the full numbers, the young men. However, when they found out what we were doing, the games and exercises that we were doing, we slowly started getting even some members. I don't know whether they were AGU. They can't say that I'm an AGU, but some members joined us. And eventually, even the most rough-looking members of the group began to participate and transform in the process. So there, we observed that, it doesn't matter whether you're illiterate or illiterate. It doesn't matter whether you're AGU or not. We all need these skills, and therefore that's how we thought we would touch the AGU. But the good news also comes is that our training is embedded in the minds of all the participants. We went back to visit them 3 years later. They remembered all these games. That's how they were able to give testimonies about them. And because these experiences were embedded in their minds, they occasionally utilize them within their community. So because they are empowered in a participatory way, I believe they'll be able to touch the wider community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Lutwama, for that take-home message. I hope we've all listened. And I want to once again thank you all for participating, for coming. You've really graced this occasion. Everybody online, Comfort, Daudi, and others, thank you very much for joining in. Let us now have our closing remarks from Dr. Eric Jemba, representing the Deputy Principal of CHUS, Professor Eric.
I'm glad to be here amidst all these many scholars. First of all, I would love to thank everyone, each one of us here, graduates, undergraduates, and us, the Makerere staff members, to have been sat here for these many hours and listen to this important dissemination. I'm so glad that my contemporary, Dr. Evelyn, gave us that detailed data from that raw community about this important engagement. As we've witnessed, she used those organic methodologies that are so welcome in the rural communities. This enabled her to generate all these data sets that she has shared with us here. So I am very happy having sat here all these 2 or 3 hours, and like any other member here, I am happy to inform you that I have gathered from the methods she used, from the testimonies, that the narratives that she has shared, I have been informed and educated in many ways. I am going to get out of here a better person. And I encourage us, all of us, to try out some of the things that she employed while there.